Hey, everybody, we're going to try this one more time because Google Hangouts killed all my audio, and we have a lot of Apple news to talk about today. I'm super excited. It's WWDC 2015. It's the big Apple product showcase where all of their new stuff is coming out, and we want to make sure that we spend a little time talking about, well, I just got done with an over 2-hour keynote, so we're not going to spend that long talking about Apple products, but we are going to go through the whole new slate. We've got updates to the Apple Watch that are going to be kind of exciting for wearable fans. We've got new Apple TV news. We've got the iPad Pro and the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus. A lot of sounds in those products. What I really like, I'm going to jump to the iPhone 6 for just a second. What I really like is that the iPhone 6S, if you say it really quickly, it sounds like the iPhone success. So I like that. It's a nifty little trick on Apple's part for branding their new devices. But let's start off with Apple Watch. I'm a big fan of wearables. Now, there weren't a ton of new announcements, but what is coming down the pipe, especially for a developer conference, is Apple is the iWatch OS 2. So the newest version of the Apple Watch software is coming down the pipe, and we're going to go into screen share here for just a second, show off some of this nifty goodness. Okay, so we've got new Apple Watches there. And this is what I mean in that the new version of the Apple Watch operating system is going to give us better control, going to give developers better control over the hardware built into these devices. And that's going to be really exciting, because we've already seen Apple Watches at the forefront of offering up health and fitness, and then also like for managing things like diabetes, so for managing blood sugar off of the types of sensors that diabetics might use. This is going to be one of the exciting new things about wearables moving forward, are these lifestyle benefits, better fitness and health tracking, better stats. You being able to take this information, this raw information that comes from the sensors built into the watch, and sharing it directly with your doctors, with your physicians, or even just your loved ones. Like if you have to help manage the health of someone, utilizing an Apple Watch style service might be really beneficial. Now, of course, the Apple Watch hardware isn't going to get a tremendous refresh, but as we can see here floating in this like sort of product image that they showcased during the keynote, the new Apple Watch body is going to be in pink. And I totally called this from my video about the MacBook. Apple is trying to position themselves more as a lifestyle and style design brand than they are a high technologies company. And so there's going to be more talk, I feel, about the style and design of new products moving forward, and less talk about the actual, like technology guts built into these devices. One of the things that I am actually really excited to see is a product red version of the Apple Watch. So for every product red Apple Watch sold, there will be a donation made, or from the proceeds of the sales of the watch, to fighting HIV and AIDS. So that's always, I always think that's really cool of Apple to step up to offer those types of sort of charitable donations on some of their products, especially because their products are pretty stinking expensive. But I'm going to jump out of screen share. But when I'm talking about things like the Apple Watch, so the new Apple Watch, there are going to be new bands. There's going to be a whole new series of leather bracelets, which I'm sure will be ridiculously expensive for leather bracelet watch straps. But then the new Apple Watch Sport aluminum model is going to be coming in this pink color. And pink is apparently the color of this year. So when the MacBook came out, I was talking about how Apple is more of a fashion brand than a technology brand now. And I think that's going to be key. Every new year, we're going to see a new color added to their product lineups. And that's going to be the way that people can tell very quickly whether or not you spent money recently on the new season of Apple gear. I'll be shocked if the new MacBook doesn't also come in some flavor of pink. So I think that's moving down the pipe, looking into the future. And then where we see with this current slate of products, pink is this year's color. So if you're walking around with a silver iPhone or a space gray Apple Watch, people aren't going to notice that you've spent money. But if you walk around with the pink one, oh, that's the new one. And people are going to get really excited about that. They're fashion. They're a fashion brand. It's fashion and lifestyle. Fashion, lifestyle, fashion. Fashion and fashion. So that's some of the new stuff coming down the pipe on Apple Watch. Again, the tech actually isn't changing very much. We're going to be seeing that new Apple Watch color in pink. But I am really looking forward to seeing what they do in improving the operating system, the new software on board. That's one of the areas where I think wearables in general still have a lot of room to grow, is in how we integrate lifestyle features into our technology. And that's something that I think Apple can bring to the table really well, that their sense of design and their sense of software can actually help us improve our relationship with technology in very organic ways. No. I seriously doubt they'll convince me to drop the Pebble, but at least they're going to continue the conversation, and I think that'll improve the ecosystem for everybody. Now, moving into the big announcement, of course, we've got to talk about the iPad Pro. Going to go back into screen share. The iPad Pro is going to be a 12.9-inch behemoth tablet. And this is so clear, and it could not be more obvious which product Apple has their sights set on. So we can see Tim Cook holding the iPad Pro. This is going to be a big device, but we can clearly see that they've got the new slate of Windows multi-mode and tablet devices in their sights. And I think this is really fascinating to see Apple rebrand the iPad. The iPad started out as a consumer consumption device. You could play games on it, you could watch videos on it, you could surf the web on it. And now their big focus is going to be on bringing productivity tools to the iPad. For too long, I think Apple has given that market to other companies that make accessories for products that, help the iPad out with a keyboard or help the iPad out in producing content. And now Apple wants to take the reins on that because they don't have a mobility product that can really compete against devices like the Surface or some of the multi-mode computers from Lenovo. This slide right here is just a quick look that they'll be improving the speakers on the iPad Pro. So now instead of the one speaker that we've had on previous iPads, there's going to be this 4-speaker array, which is orientation aware. I think this is a really cool adaptation because now, depending on how you're holding the iPad, if you're holding it up vertically, if you're holding it horizontally in portrait mode, landscape mode, these speakers will dynamically shift their playback to make sure that you're getting the best stereo audio environment. It's one area that I think Apple has actually fallen off the mark. The original iPhone was actually amazing for audio for its time, but other companies have started doing audio better. I think the only way to improve upon something like this would be to start building the speakers into the bezel so they're front firing quad speaker array. But at least this is a huge up improvement and upgrade over what the iPad Air is currently capable of, and Apple claims that this is going to be twice as loud as the current iPad. Of course, with a screen this large, we now have support for an almost full-sized on-screen keyboard. But if you want to do one better, Apple's going to be selling a flip cover, which looks a lot like the type of hardware that you can get currently with the Surface Pro. Again, this is what I think is so fascinating about moving the iPad out of being a consumer consumption device and now into the area and the era of it being a productivity device. And I think moving into the future, this is really Apple's next stage. I think they're going to try and position iOS as being the operating system of the future, and OS X is going to be sort of the legacy hardware operating system, which starts to wither away and fall apart. And we're going to have an entire ecosystem of apps moving forward, not desktop computer environments, not that full laptop grade experience or that full desktop grade experience. Moving forward with touch features, we're going to focus on iOS. And that's also where they're making all their money these days. So it kind of just makes sense that they would continue to move down that path. But for those of us who really wanted to see an iPad Pro or a MacBook Touch style device that featured OS X, that's not really going to be in the cards. And I really don't think it's going to come anytime soon. And I think when Apple does finally make the transition into all devices supporting touchscreens, it'll be built on the back of iOS, not OS X. And so that's also kind of curious as we move forward. One of the big features for the iPad Pro is the fact that you can split screen apps. That was a feature that Samsung started on the Note series of phones. Microsoft really embraced in Windows 8 and now Windows 10. And now Apple is providing us a tablet built specifically because hold on, how do they describe it? The width of the iPad Pro is the same as the height of the iPad Air. So it's all, the screen is almost like having two iPad Airs stacked side by side. And so when you go into split screening apps, you can have two full apps side by side in that environment. Now, I think it'll be interesting to see if they can start dynamically shifting the size of those apps. Like in Windows 10, you can snap apps and have smaller versions of apps. You can kind of dynamically move windows around for a really easy arrangement and placement. I don't think iOS is going to be smart enough to handle that style of computing yet. But I think it's only another generation or two before we start to see iOS really start to compete with the feature set offered from devices like the new MacBook. And it's interesting watching the new MacBook whittle down features to become more like the tablets that Apple's already supporting, getting everyone used to only having one port on your computer, for example. That's a very tablet mindset. That's not a professional grade computing mindset. We still really need more support for peripherals and devices and attachments in the professional space. But for most general consumers, we can kind of start working towards that. You got the one plug that plugs things into it, which we're sort of used to on things like iPads and iPhones. So moving forward, that's what we're going to see. And just to lend further evidence that this is really the next stage for Apple Pro gear, because it's called the iPad Pro. I'm going to go back into screen share one more time for the iPad Pro. What do we see here? We see a stylus. Yes, folks, the iPad Pro now supports what Apple is calling the Apple Pencil. This is its own powered stylus, and it utilizes a series of sensors to, one, not only recognize force, so just like we have pressure sensitive styluses on products like the Note 4 and the Note 5, this also will measure, so it'll measure the angle on the screen that the stylus is to also change the brush tip. Say you're in an art app and you want more of a flourish or you want more of a wider brush stroke. As you angle the pen down, as you angle the pencil down, it'll respond in kind based on the angle that this stylus is interacting with the screen on the tablet. So that's a cool adaptation. I mean, I don't know that I've necessarily seen that style of support on a mobile device, on sort of a more phone or tablet style device. But again, it's only a baby step away from where we've already been on things like the Surface and on the Note. And I think it's curious to see Apple now re-embrace the stylus, especially after, this is me being kind of snarky, but after, in 2007, Steve Jobs made a huge point out of, oh, we've got the perfect digit for interacting with our screens, and it's called a finger, and who would ever want to use a stylus? Well, now that the iPad is being positioned as a productivity device and not a consumption device, not an entertainment device, now that you get work done on an iPad, not just watch movies and plays the games on an iPad, now we actually do need a finer point control. And it doesn't always make sense for us to utilize a mouse. Sometimes we do need that stylus support. And so that's where Apple's moving again in making iOS the future OS and OS 10 the legacy OS. Of course, Microsoft was on hand to demonstrate the newest versions of Office with full stylus support on the iPad Pro. Again, productivity is going to be king moving forward on these types of mobile devices. And this is where Apple wants to position more of their focus, because that's where they're making more of their money. And one thing I thought was kind of curious about Apple Pencil was in the cap of Apple Pencil, you're going to find a lightning connector. Apparently, all of the sensors built into this stylus require this to have its own battery. So as you use this thing, you will occasionally need to charge it. And this, I think, is actually a little uncharacteristically clunky of Apple. That's sort of for a company that really embraces design, the ease of use, the portability, that's one of those things that you as the user need to manage. And that doesn't feel a lot like Apple. You know what I mean? So you have to pay attention to the battery on your Apple stylus. And then when it's running low, you've got to plug it into the lightning connector on your tablet, where it's going to pull battery from your tablet to then recharge the stylus. We can hope that that's a quick charge style solution. We can hope that, that you get plenty of alerts. So you're not in the middle of doing a lot of really aggressive work and then have a bucket of cold water thrown on you. You have to stop and wait for this thing to charge back up before you can go back into working on it again. I just thought that was kind of interesting that that's how Apple decided to handle this new suite of sensors. And so how that actually affects users in real world conditions, in real world situations, once people start utilizing this, I don't think that's going to be a profound detriment for that system. But again, it is kind of interesting that with the number of different stylus and tablet and touch interaction systems that we've developed, that Apple does have to have an included battery for the iPad Pro's pencil support. And also just the fact that they're calling it a pencil. I just think that's kind of silly. So that's the iPad Pro. Now, pricing on the iPad Pro is gonna be kind of interesting. I've got to pull up my notes here on the side. So starting off with a 32 gigabyte Wi-Fi only model, we're looking at $799. Again, they're really positioning this opposite products like the Surface. So when we look at the pricing for Microsoft Surface, the Surface Pro 3 is already dropping below that $799 price point when you start shopping sales. We have the Surface 3, which is more of an Atom-powered netbooky kind of tablet, and that's coming well under this price point. So this doesn't have the full power of a proper laptop computer environment, but Apple's pricing it directly as a competitor against the Surface Pro. Now, the Apple Pencil is going to cost you an additional $100, and the keyboard case, that flip cover keyboard case that I showed you, is going to be $169, which means a fully outfitted Apple iPad Pro with the pencil and the keyboard case is going to be noticeably more expensive than the Surface Pro 3. If we start with the Core i3 version, which is a full laptop in a shell of just a regular tablet, then we're really duking it out over what capabilities we think moving into the future people are really going to want. Are you going to want legacy software support, new apps moving forward in a Windows 10 environment, which can mix very gracefully between a desktop style computing experience and a tablet style computing experience? Or are you wanting to just rip the Band-Aid off and go full speed into an iOS only environment, in which case the iPad Pro makes a lot of sense. So that's, I think, going to be one of the most interesting fights of the future is how do we handle mobile computing? Is it going to be more tablet-y? Is it going to be more app-y? Or do we still need to have that kind of support built in for legacy programs? And I think professionals moving forward are going to be looking at, hey, can I still get my video editing done? Can I still get my photoshopping done? That kind of work. And will we still need a full desktop grade operating system to achieve all that? And I think that's where Apple is definitely banking. But once we start climbing up in storage for the iPad Pro, we're looking at $949 for the 128 gigabyte iPad Pro. And then if we want to include LTE data support, that's going to jump us up to $1,079. So that's $1,079 for a 128 gigabyte iPad Pro with LTE built in. So yeah, these things are definitely priced out at that premium grade, that premium price market. The capabilities on these, I think, will be really interesting to see how they perform in day-to-day activities, and especially once we start focusing on some of those productivity features like document support. Obviously, Microsoft is going to have a huge hand in that, but then also things like mobile video editing, mobile photo editing, mobile content production. Will the iPad Pro be able to stack up against some of the newer range of Windows tablets, which are full PCs, but priced out at lower price points for the amount of what's built inside of them? So moving right along, we want to spend a little time talking about Apple TV, because Apple TV got a refresh and a makeover that I think a lot of people are going to find really cool. Again, we have such a huge battle going on for the living room right now that we're going to see some really exciting dynamic content fighting between the little boxes and Chromecast-y style solutions opposite things like game consoles. So, Apple TV is going to bring some of the graphics prowess of the iOS ecosystem to mobile gaming and putting those mobile games up on your TV. And now Apple TV is also going to be Siri powered, which gives us voice controls and voice search very similar to what we see built into the Xbox One. Very quickly being able to dynamically control the UI of your device through this new remote. So this remote has a little microphone built into it. And then this whole surface here at the top of the remote is a glass trackpad. So anything that you would interact with on your iPhone or your iPad can now very quickly be interacted with in a very similar way on this touch surface here. So as you move the remote around, the content is going to scan very quickly. They even showed something that was really cute, and I can't show you because it was video. But as they shook the remote, it shook the item that was currently selected. So it would like wobble the screen just as you wobbled the remote, which I thought was just kind of a cute little touch to show you that your remote control is actively controlling what's going on your screen. But now Siri is going to be a huge part of this experience where you can now start asking like, hey, I want to watch a Bond movie. And it'll pull up James Bond movies. And then you can further refine your search saying, I only want to watch James Bond movies with Sean Connery. And so it's going to whittle down dynamically based on your casual vocal commands. In addition to this, you can also do a lot of voice searching on top of the content that you're already watching. So if you're already watching a video and you want to say like, oh, well, what's the weather like in Alaska? A little bar at the bottom of your screen is going to pop up and give you this information without stopping what's going on your screen. And one of the things that I thought was really cool, and I wish I could show you a video demo of that, was some of the APIs and stuff built into this is going to allow third-party developers to take advantage of this as well. But in the middle of watching a TV show, they did a demo where the person running the demo spoke into the remote and said, what did she just say? And it rewound about 15 seconds of the video and then temporarily pulled up captions so you could read what was going on. There have been a ton of times where I've been watching, because I hate how dynamic audio is on our movies and our TV shows. So you've got the video and an explosion goes off and it's super loud. So you turn down the volume and then they cut to like a dialogue sequence and you're like, oh, I can't hear anything. So I've got to turn the volume back up. And something like that would be really helpful because you could say like, oh, what did they say? And it'll automatically rewind 15, 30 seconds, something like that, and then pull up the captions as you're readjusting the volume on the TV, because our TVs apparently can't handle dynamic compression and leveling for audio, even though it's the year 2015. And we've had things like compressors in recording studios since I believe the late 50s or early 60s, but I digress. So I thought that was an amazing little adaptation. Again, we're going to be seeing a ton of support at launch for services like Netflix. Obviously, iTunes is going to be built in, Hulu, HBO Go, and things like live sporting events. Apple is really pushing towards all of your TV basically being data. So it doesn't matter what TV packages you've got, what channels are actually on your TV. It's going to matter more what services are now starting to stream their content via licensing deals over the internet. So they showed an amazing example of MLB.com giving you the ability to split screen different ball games happening at the same time, and you could shift the focus using the glass trackpad on the Apple remotes. You could be listening to one game and watching it while another game is in a smaller picture-in-picture window, and it's all data. It's all 60 frame per second streaming data, which is really where TV needs to go. So these services like Hulu and Netflix are going to be ahead of the curve, supporting this stuff on Apple TV right out of the box. And I would imagine any service that has some type of live streaming version or data enabled version is very quickly going to be getting on board Apple TV. Out of all the products, me not being the biggest Apple fan, this was the kind of content distribution and streaming ability that I thought was most exciting coming from this Apple keynote. That developers are going to be jumping on board, that we already have content distribution deals in place, and that this is how I envision the living room of the future. I mean, and by the future, I mean like over the next year, not over like the next 20 years, but over the next year, really intelligently incorporating voice search, voice controls, and touch controls into how we interact with our data and services, and sending that stuff very easily to a TV screen. So that stuff makes me very excited, because I think it's about distributing all of these services across different glowing rectangles. So Apple TV, I thought was actually a pretty cool demonstration for how we're going to be moving forward with that. And of course, they were showing off games and stuff too, using that trackpad. I don't need to go back into screen share. It's just someone holding a remote and their thumb touching it and the game being played on the TV screen. So that's Apple TV. And lastly, that brings us to iPhone. So, of course, we can't have WWDC without a big old fancy iPhone announcement. This is now the year of the 6S and the 6S Plus. Like I said, the iPhone success. So that's going to be really exciting for Apple people coming down the pipe. Again, this year just further reinforces where if you're shopping your iOS phones on some type of contract, I would really recommend trying to get on the S line of products. Every 2 years we have a tick and a talk. So Apple changes the form factor and gives the specs a little bit of a bump, but really the big news is that the shape of the phone changed. The year following with the S line, the phone shape stays pretty much the same, but all of the guts inside get a power refresh. It's where we see our biggest camera improvements. It's where we see improvements to the processor. And again, Apple didn't disappoint. If you wanted the more powerful phone in the same form factor, being on the S line, I think, is the wiser investment over the course of your 2-year contract if that's how you shop your phones. And again, I'm going to go back into screen share because I think it's funny. Now, if you want to be seen, if you want to be fashionable, if you want to be stylish, this is the new iPhone for you. This rose pink gold is the new color, the hot new trend this fashion season for the iPhone. If you want people to know that you bought your iPhone this year and that you spent money on the most expensive iPhone model, this is the color that you want to showcase so that people know that you don't have one of those scummy old iPhones, that you've got one of the pretty brand new iPhones because fashion, 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 fashion. And they spent almost as much time talking about this new manufacturing process, this new alloy that they're going to be utilizing in the iPhone, than they did any of the technology features built into it. Apple is the Louis Vuitton of tech. They are a fashion brand first and foremost, and a tech company second because they're focused on that lifestyle experience. Here it is opposite the iPhone 6S Plus. No big changes coming down the pipe. We've already seen a bunch of people putting out videos on the shells that these phones are. I would have to believe that the manufacturing process where we were worried about this break right here in the seam, where bend gate happened the most often for iPhones, has probably been addressed. And to incorporate all of the new Force Touch features, which we're going to talk about, the 3D touch in the iPhone, that required them to actually make the phone a little bit thicker. So there was no bragging about having the thinnest possible phone, because this phone is a fraction of a millimeter thicker than the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus. And that actually makes me happy. That is a lifestyle benefit. It's going to make your phone a little bit more durable. It's going to make your phone, a little bit more survivable over the course of your 2-year contract. But for some reason now we can't brag about how thin the phone is because it's not the thinnest phone ever. I don't care about thin. I care about whether or not these phones survive, and I care about whether or not they're durable. So the fact that Apple has addressed this in their casing, making the overall phone just a little bit thicker, I'm going to say is a big thumbs up. I am happy to see Apple take a step back from making the thinness the major feature in design and actually addressing lifestyle concerns. On top of this, they're going to be using a new ion enhanced glass. They claim it's going to be more durable and more scratch proof, and that's cool. Although I still would love to see Apple start to adopt sapphire, just like they did for their camera lenses. And so this brings us to the Force Touch demo. And this is actually something that, again, in addressing lifestyle concerns and building on their experience, building out the Apple Watch, that I think will be a really cool new set of features for how people navigate their phones. There's too much activity on the home button of an iPhone. So, you can single press, you can double press, you can triple press, that's too much activity for one button. So now navigating a series of menus, contextual information, and multitasking, the phone is going to measure the amount of force that you press into the screen. So say you're in your email app, in your mail app, a moderate force press on one message is going to pop up a preview of that message. Pushing even harder into that message will then fully open the email. Swiping from the bottom corner of the screen, that's actually what I was showing in the screen share. If you swipe with medium force on the side of the screen, it's going to pull up the multitasking cards layout so that you can quickly swipe through using a medium force swipe through all of this. It adds another dimension of interactivity without having to add a bunch of buttons to the phone. And so this, I think, again, is another way that Apple has showcased in the past and is going to showcase in the future, that they're focused on the lifestyle experience. So while they're not my favorite phones and they're not my favorite tablets, it's innovation like this that I actually think makes the experience of using a phone better. And that's where we can actually drive the market. I think phone hardware is kind of plateauing. So we need to focus on the lifestyle experience, the software experience. That's where all of our newest and exciting features and setups and apps are going to come from. And this is an operating system wide experience. Other things like if you long press on an app, or if you force, excuse me, it's not a long press. It's if you press forcefully on an app, you'll get menus to take you directly into different settings or into different streams. Like on Instagram, you can go directly into shooting a photo, or you can go directly into your feed just by pressing forcefully on the app. You can get those menu items up very quickly. So I think 3D Touch, as they're calling it, is actually going to be a really fun new feature and a really necessary new feature for how we interact with services on iPhones moving forward. Again, I never saw that Apple was going to put in a back button or a menu button or a multitasking button to try and delineate all of the different things that you can do on an iPhone. This type of thing makes sense. And eventually, I think it'll be the end of the home button. That's how we'll actually kill that last piece of hardware on the front face and have an iPhone that's all screen. It's through innovation like how forcefully you touch the screen. That'll be how we finally eliminate that last piece of hardware. And we already know that Apple is working towards the same thing that Qualcomm has been showing off, where you can actually get your fingerprint through the screen. So you don't need a hardware button for that anymore. I think a future iPhone 7 or iPhone 7S will probably showcase a no home button design. This is the first step. I promise you, come think about this video years from now. When the iPhone home button goes away, it'll be because of things like 3D Touch. I am already predicting that probably within 2 years, we'll start to hear grumblings of iPhone designs without home buttons on them. Shocking, I know. So the other big announcement, I guess I'm going to hold the camera as one of the last announcements. One of the other major announcements was the notion that the iPad Pro and the iPhone 6S now feature the A9 processor. This processor GPU combo gives you desktop quality performance. And I don't know what they mean by that. That's another one of those feel-good statements that Apple likes to put out about the performance of their products. You know, it sounds really emotional, like, ooh, it's the most forward-thinkingest or the most powerful iPhone they've ever produced. Like we would expect them to ever put out an iPhone that was less powerful than the iPhone they put out a year before. But they had this really cool Warhammer demo, so you could see what the console quality graphics were like, and that they were playing this game in 1080p at 60 frames per second, which is actually kind of something that consoles still struggle with. Obviously, the gameplay probably isn't going to be as in-depth as what we might see on a console, but this is already starting to tie into things like Apple TV. So you could be playing a game like Asphalt on your phone, 60 frame per second in 60 frame per second quality at 1080p, throw it to your Apple TV and still have your account follow you over to that experience so you can game from your phone or from your TV in a really seamless way. I think Apple actually has an ecosystem that supports that style of gaming. And we know that moving gaming from different screens is kind of the hot new thing. You know, I want to move a game from my computer to my TV, and I want Steam to allow me to do that. NVIDIA is working on hardware. Razer is working on hardware where you can start moving that gaming experience all over the place. So Apple is also going to be jumping into that market. And I think they have a unique approach to building out their ecosystem so that we have those types of features and that type of functionality. And I think it's also going to be, moving forward, the actual gaming prowess of our consoles isn't going to be as important as the entire living room ecosystem that they bring. So voice search and multimedia and music streaming and video and how it ties into your TV cable package and whether or not it communicates with one of your phones or another tablet or your computer, all of those things are going to need to work together as fluidly as possible to get consumers on board. And so with Apple TV probably not as expensive as a modern day gaming console, they're bringing a lot of that Xbox functionality to a price that's probably going to cost a fraction. They didn't actually announce full pricing details, but we should see Apple TV on store shelves ready to go by November for the holiday buying season. And of course, with that, they also announced, because this is a developer conference, that the Apple TV is going to have its own operating system, which is derivative of iOS. So there's going to be a flavor of iOS for the iPhone, for the iPad, and now for Apple TV, which again is further proof of Microsoft being the big competitor. Microsoft is trying to talk about universal apps. Well, most apps moving forward are really going to be focused on some flavor of iOS. So you can build out an app for the iPhone. It's going to be really easy to move that app to the iPad. And now it's going to be just as easy to move that app to Apple TV. But let's get back to the iPhone, because we got to wrap up some of the things here. We've got a new second generation Touch ID. Another thing that's been a feather in the cap for iPhone fans. Samsung has radically improved fingerprint scanning on their Galaxy phones. They don't require swipes anymore. We know Google is going to be building in a native support for fingerprint scanning into Android Marshmallow. But I think iPhone still stands as the gold standard for quickly putting your thumb on a button and having it scan your fingerprint. And so the second generation Touch ID, Apple claims, is going to be twice as fast. Even if it's only a little bit faster than the current Touch ID, that's still better than most of the Android ecosystem as it pertains to fingerprint scanning. So any improvements here are going to just kind of further Apple's lead on fingerprint and biometric security for mobile consumer devices. And again, as we're all really focused on moving forward on mobile payments and systems like, PayPal and Apple Pay and Samsung Pay, having really baller fingerprint scanning tech is going to be crucial for making that as seamless as possible. But even just for the act of unlocking your phone, in my experiences, that the Apple system, the Apple home hardware button has been the fastest way to utilize a service like that, even though it does force you to maintain quite a bit of unused bezel at the bottom of your screen, which is why that Qualcomm technology for scanning on the screen can't get here fast enough. But you know what? I've been holding off on all of this. We've got to talk about the camera. The camera is this was frustrating and exciting at the same time for me, because Apple kept conflating resolution with size. So they kept saying the bigger camera. It's not a bigger camera sensor. It really seems like Apple's going to be keeping the same camera sensor size, but they are increasing the resolution from 8 megapixels to 12. We now have a 12 megapixel camera built into this iPhone, which will finally provide for us a UHD or 4K video stream. We'll have higher resolution images to play with. And they did this it's actually a picture of the sensor. I don't know why we needed to see that. But one of the new technologies that they're touting is making sure that there's no crosstalk. So as light hits each of these little individual photo sites that make up a pixel, often you'll see color and light information bleed through, because we're talking about such small limits, such small barriers between these individual photo sites. So Apple claims that their new 12 megapixel camera sensor will better channel light for each of these color subpixels. So that should give us far more accurate color information. Now, where that's going to be kind of tricky for the iPhone is the sensor size does not increase, though. So if we're still dealing with a 1/3 inch iPhone sensor at 12 megapixels, that's going to run up against some of the low light superiority of the Sony and Samsung ISOCELL sensors that have moved up to a 1/2 inch style sensor. So when we've got an LG G4 with a 1/2 inch sensor with 16 megapixel resolution, that's pretty close when it comes to the size of the photo sites that we're going to see built into that 12 megapixel camera sensor, and a 1/3 inch camera sensor coming from Apple. And that also means that the optics on board are not going to do as good a job on the iPhone. This is my prediction, and we're going to see as soon as the iPhone's out. I'm going to be running a full camera test. I hope I'll have my hands on the iPhone 6S Plus. But even on the regular 6S, I want to see whether or not we get improved depth of field, if we get a shallower depth of field, if we get improved macro support. Because macro shots, the close focusing distance on an iPhone has not improved as much as it has in the Android ecosystem, where the Note 5 and the LG G4 are actually phenomenal macro shooters, which then with the larger image sensor and the larger aperture give you stunningly shallow depth of field. iPhone has had a long, hard trek into improving their cameras to match those types of photography features. If the 1/3 inch sensor has the same lens assembly with the same focusing distance, then it's not really going to be a tremendous benefit for people that are into things like macro photography. It will be an improvement for people who are into things like panorama photos and HDR, though. You'll have more accurate color information for your HDR photos. And when you hold your phone vertically, vertically, the LG G4 and the Samsungs have had improved panorama support where you can scan vertically across your scene and have crazy high resolution panorama photos. Well, you couldn't compare with an 8 megapixel sensor on the iPhone 6. Now with a 12 megapixel sensor, that panorama photo stitching is going to get much better. It's going to be far improved because you're just going to have more resolution to play with. It's going to be insane the way that you'll be able to zoom into a panorama photo, because we've been playing with that kind of stuff on Samsungs and LGs for a while, for a couple months now. Now iPhone users will finally get to partake of that resolution-y goodness. But that also brings me to sort of the bummer. One of the other things I was kind of disappointed of in this iPhone announcement, in that the iPhone 6S and the iPhone 6S Plus are going to still start at 16 gigabytes of storage space. So the pricing remains the same. They act like that's such a huge benefit that they're not going to make their phones more expensive when they cycle over into new flagship. If you're doing on contract pricing, it's still going to be $199 for a 16 gigabyte iPhone and $299 for a 16 gigabyte iPhone 6S Plus. And considering that we don't know if the iPhone 6S camera will get optical image stabilization, that the screen resolutions don't seem to have changed. They didn't announce higher resolution displays. So that means it's 720p for the 6S and 1080p for the 6S Plus. While we're now hearing about Sony's with 4K displays, I think that's kind of unnecessary resolution. But we've been having tremendous runs of 2K phone screens on the G4, on the Samsung Galaxy S6 and the Note 5, and especially once we start playing with things like VR. You know, when we're putting the phones right up against our eyeballs with magnification and lenses, that extra resolution can come in handy for some of those features. So those things don't seem to have been improved on the iPhone 6, and we don't get additional storage. I would have to believe that we're probably getting the same battery built into the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus. So, I wasn't expecting there to be a price break, but I really was hoping that we would see the base model iPhone start at 32. Now, why is this a problem? Because we have no expandable storage on an iPhone. It's very expensive to get those iPhone connector things where you can plug in some temporary storage, which can then move files through a special app, but it's not really system wide, and there's no built-in file management system on the iPhone. You always have to add some other feature to get there. But when we start talking about higher resolution photos, those take up more space. They have living photos or live photos. So when you take a photo, it takes a little snippet of video alongside the photo. We've had that on Windows phones for a while. So iPhone users will now finally get this experience where when you're looking at a photo, you can 3D touch with force, and it'll play a little video snippet that was taken at the same time as when you took that photo. All of those take up additional footage. And when we start talking about UHD video, high quality 4K video, it's typically around 3 minutes of footage for a gigabyte of storage. Now, we know when we get the 16 gigabyte iPhone, you don't get all 16 GBs. You're actually closer between 13 or 14 out of the box with nothing else installed on the phone. No music, none of your photos, and none of your apps. That means you can fill up the storage on an iPhone with about a half hour of video shooting. That's not a lot of space. That new camera is going to annihilate the video and photo capability. The photo and video capabilities are going to annihilate the built-in storage on that 16 gigabyte iPhone, which sort of, if you're really into photos and videos, means you really just have to step up an additional $100 to the 64 gigabyte versions of the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus. So already their pricing at the low end is sort of just the fashion pricing. Like, you just want the new pink iPhone, great. It does have a better camera, but you will fill up that phone stupid fast by the time you install all of your apps, back up some of your photos, and start shooting some video on it. And that's super intense. Like that's crazy to think that we're still releasing non-storage upgradable premium priced phones with only 16 gigabytes of storage at the base model. So I still think they're going to sell like hotcakes. People are still going to say, oh, well, it's, $199 for the 16 GBs. And that's what I've always gotten in the past. But I think that's very disappointing to not see a base model 32 gigabyte iPhone, or even just maybe you could have saved it for the 6S Plus. So the iPhone 6S starts at 16, the 6S Plus starts at 32, and then they both jump to 64 with an extra $100. I don't know. I'm kind of bummed out about that, and especially knowing that we're still kind of talking about carrier pricing, for technology that only just catches the iPhone up to certain technology uses, and then we see some cool bumps like this 3D touch, the force sensitive screen, that we don't talk about what just the outright off contract pricing is, especially as a lot of carriers like Verizon, they're going to be moving over into only doing no interest loans. So you don't get a phone for $200 and then pay it off over 2 years. You just have a monthly bill that adds to the price of your monthly service fee. And that's how you pay off your phone over 2 years. So, that means I would expect that the price on a base model iPhone to be somewhere around between 25 and $30 a month additional on top of your service bill. And that's how you'll pay off your iPhone. So not talking about, well, this is going to be a $700 phone or a $750 phone, or, stepping up to 64 gigabytes means that you've got a $900 phone. We didn't hear pricing like that from Apple. We hid behind carrier contract pricing, which is quickly becoming extinct. And again, I'm sort of disappointed that Apple wouldn't just come out and say, this is how much our gadgets are going to cost. This is what we're going to do moving forward. But that was a tremendous amount of very fast talking from me. I do have one comment here. I can't even pronounce this name, and I do apologize because I can't read Russian Cyrillic. But this is from somebody who asks, what do you think about charging the pen from the iPad and not a standalone charger? So first of all, I have to believe there will be some sort of standalone charging stylus support for the iPad Pro's pencil. I have to believe that. And I really hope that this means that hopefully for an iPhone 7, for the next generation iPad Air, for the next iPad mini, that they're all going to support the same stylus. And when that happens, if they don't have some sort of little cradle dock where you can just plug your stylus in separate from the actual devices, I'll be very surprised. I just feel that's very uncharacteristically un-Apple-like to not have some kind of solution for making sure power management is handled. That I think would be very disappointing. I think it's kind of silly because as you're trying to work, you're really in the flow. Maybe your tablet battery's running a little lower, or your pen is starting to run out of juice. It throws such a huge bucket of cold water on your progress, on your momentum, to stop and have to manage the power on something like a stylus on your pencil. So that I hope is addressed, or that they allow us to pair multiple pencils so that we can very quickly swap. So you can plug in one on maybe a little standalone charging dock. Is that one starting to run low? You just pop it off, plug in a different one, and then you can go right back into working again. But that's going to be a $200 solution. That's going to be a $200 solution, plus whatever it costs to have some sort of charging cradle for the Apple Pencil. So that's not going to come cheap. But when you're really trying to get work done from these types of devices, then I guess that would be a fair way to go about getting that work done, even if that fair way comes at some kind of pricing premium. But of course, I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear from you cats out there what you were excited about in this announcement. I'm just going to do one quick check to see if I have any additional comments, because like I said, Google totally borked what I was able to talk about. It doesn't look like I have any other comments or questions on here. We're going to be seeing iPhone pre-sales going up September 12th in a couple days. And then on September 25th, you will see tons of news coverage as people wait outside in lines wrapped around the blocks of their favorite Apple stores. So that's when the iPhones are going to launch, with other products that we mentioned in this video actually coming closer, more towards the November timeframe for the holiday sales. I have another question from Mr. Kai12345. That's the combination of my luggage. Mr. Kai asks, do you think the iPad Pro is Apple's answer to a MacBook with a touchscreen that people have been asking for? At the very beginning of this video, I said, I think this is the clear shot. The iPad line is going to be their move into the future of mobile and multi-mode touch-based computing. That is absolutely their competitor for the Surface. I think that's super, super clear, especially even at the price points that they're talking about, like I mentioned also at the beginning of this video. And so I don't foresee OS 10 really making that transition, or at least not in its entirety. When we do start seeing OS 10 start to transition over, it won't be OS 10. It'll be OS 10 with more of an iOS feel. And then I think it's all just going to be iOS moving forward, whatever the future version of iOS. I think it'll be hysterical when we get iOS X, iOS 10, then that's maybe what they're planning on making that transition so that people still feel like it's OS 10, it's OS X, but it's iOS X. I don't know. I think there's a branding opportunity in there for Apple, maybe, who knows. But thank you for Mr. Kai and Alexander. Oh, Alexander, I don't know why it was showing in Cyrillic. Alexander, I apologize for asking that question about the charger. But Google Hangouts just now changed over from a Cyrillic alphabet to an English alphabet for me to find out that your name is Alexander. But Mr. Kai, Alexander, thank you so much for your questions. I want to hear from you guys. What did you think about WWDC 2015? What were you excited about? Again, there's always, I think it's a successful Apple keynote, because I'm not the biggest fan of Apple products, but it's always a successful keynote when they leave, and I want some of that stuff in my Google and Microsoft-based products. So some of the things from Apple TV make me very excited as a cord cutter, better integration with TV services and streaming video services. That's always going to be super cool. I think some of the Force Touch features on the iPhone help us get away from having on-screen control. So that could be very exciting if we could start handling more things through pressure and gestures, as opposed to always having to have screen taken up by on-screen controls. That's another move into the future. I'm very disappointed in the pricing strategy for the storage that's built into the new iPhones. And I think the iPhone is already going to be launching with a camera that's going to fall behind what we see from Sony and Samsung and LG. They've been moving into larger camera sensors and better depth of field and better background blur and bokeh and wider apertures. And I think the iPhone is going to have a tough battle, especially if the iPhone 6s doesn't come with optical image stabilization, image stabilization built in. So I want to hear from you folks. Definitely drop me some comments down below this video, because those are the kind of conversations I love getting into. And there was a ton of news from Apple WWDC 2015. So I want to hear from you folks on what we are going to be seeing from the last quarter of this year, because I think Apple is going to sell like crazy. I think these products are going to sell like nuts. I mean, like, they're just going to go, I think consumers are going to go nuts for them. But for us techies that really like getting into the nuance of the technology built in, I think this is also, again, further proof that Apple is really more of a lifestyle and fashion brand than they are a high technologies brand. So drop me those comments. Let's get into some arguments. Let's get into some civil debates. I don't like it when people get too cranky in the comments. I think we can all have a grown-up conversation about this stuff. But as always, folks, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more rambling podcasts and blogs and videos like these. And I would not be able to continue producing on this channel if you all weren't out there supporting it by hitting the fan funding, by shopping using my Amazon affiliate links, and by sharing my videos on your favorite social sites like Reddit and Twitter and Facebook and the Googles Plus. So please keep bringing more cool people to the party. Hit that thumbs up button, and I will catch you all on the next video.